Season 2, Episode 1, Never Quite Native. Welcome back to the Missionary Position podcast, Season 2. We're going to go deeper as we look through the window into my world as a missionary. When I was a young girl, I watched the movie of Pocahontas, and I had to be physically removed from the school hall as I was crying so badly at the fact that John Smith left Pocahontas after all the bending of cultures and loving of each other they'd done and the flexibility to make it work. We know in the true story, Pocahontas went back to the UK with John Smith and the greatest work of her life begun, to adapt herself to British culture. Between worlds. There's a part of missions no one really prepares you for. They warn you about the different food. They warn you about the weather and the heat. They warn you about the language, the systems, the pace of life. What they don't warn you about is what it does to you. Because culture doesn't just change how you live. It slowly starts changing how you see yourself. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to answer a simple question. Who am I now? As I've shared before, I'm a chav from Middlesbrough. Kind of a hard knocker, but brought up in a Christian family. So mocking comes easy, laughing at people's mistakes, and food being a priority. Although being from Middlesbrough has many similarities to Filipino culture, or I've found myself translating them as similarities. I think the economic environment we live in helps, as we live in what I call the borough version of the Philippines. And I love it, albeit it uncomfortable and hard work. All these parts of me that are from the British culture get transferred into the culture of the Filipinos. But there are many big differences which I've had to learn the hard way. If you are a salt of the earth person in England and you say it how it is, which kind of both those things go hand in hand. However, here in the Philippines, there is a hierarchy of who gets to speak and if their words matter most. A way to address people younger and older and even your own friendship group. Here, everyone has titles and it really seems to matter. When I came here, I was adamant they would just call me Ruth, a name lost to me these 15 years. I really miss hearing my own name because that's who I really am. A cultural loss I've had to adapt to. I remember lots of our members were in their teens and we were in our early 20s. And a pastor heard one of the teens call Andrew Kuya Pastor, which means brother pastor. Meaning, yeah, you're our pastor, but you're also like our big brother. Which we know was meant as a term of endearment. However, this pastor saw it as a sign of disrespect towards Andrew and wanted that teen to never call Andrew that again. So now he just calls him Tatai, which means dad. Living within different cultures, you must learn to adjust your tone, humor, and expectations. They are not the same. It's a constant daily learning in what I call the school of culture. I tell our church members, I'm the greatest advocate for Filipino culture. I will defend Filipino culture more than anyone in the room. I explained that you guys were born here. You didn't choose this culture, but I have chosen to lose my own culture and be in a constant state of learning and adapting to the Filipino culture. So as I embrace and learn your culture, I choose to love it. You were born into it without choice, but I make a choice to adapt and rid myself of my British culture and take on the Filipino culture in waves and lessons of miscommunication and misunderstanding and growing and adapting and changing. The slow erosion. It's not dramatic, but it is constant. In September, I went to England for my brother's wedding and I wanted to represent Filipino culture. So I wore a Filipina national dress and I was so proud of myself. People in England don't know that I was dressed in Filipino national dress, but I did. That didn't matter to me. I was proud to be representing my culture, my home, through my wedding outfit at my brother's wedding. While I was there making toasts and dancing barefoot, my uncle ran over to me and shouted, "Ruth, come here." And I was shocked. "What's wrong?" And he told me, "The photographer of the wedding is a Filipina. I've been talking to her and she saw your outfit and wondered why you were wearing Filipiniana." I quickly went to find this lady and I was hugging her straight away. And straight away, I spoke to her in Tagalog and asked her where she was from, what language she speaks, and all the things. She had the most perfect British accent. and I had the most Filipino accent in that 10-mile radius. It was amazing to find someone from my Filipino culture who isn't Filipino at all, in the sense of she's lived in England all her life, and yet we connected through something deep in the culture. It revealed to me just how Filipino I am. So very, very Filipino. She couldn't speak Tagalog, and yet her English was way better than mine. I was missing home while loving where I was. Every year, when it gets to Christmas, I go through a cycle, and I'm just climbing out of it now. You may look at cycles as sinful things, or weak things, or human things, but for me, I'm not scared of cycles because they're your patterns of coping until you get your healing or breakthrough to the next level with God. Even your faith works in patterns and cycles as you build on what went before. Like grief is a cycle. If you lose someone, you must enter through the cycle to get healing. Not that in grief, healing is the end result. As with losing people, you really do grow around the grief. It becomes part of who you are and part of your story. And for me, every Christmas, when finally every party is done, every Christmas gift wrapped and given, somewhere in the middle of that week between Christmas and New Year, I crash. My adaptability to Filipino culture gets thin. My language capabilities become headaches, and I just want British food, British TV shows, British carols, British humour. And every year for a long time, I've felt shame about this, or like I'm weak, or I don't have enough love for my Filipino culture, or enough grace for my host culture. But while watching a basketball game last week on our court, I told Andrew, I'm in that place where I just want to sleep for a month. And the thought of eating rice or adobo, I cannot bear. And hearing lots of Ilocano makes me cry, gives me a headache, and makes me feel left out. Please don't be offended, mga kapwa ko. Imagine if you also lived in a foreign culture all the time, adjusting yourself, adapting yourself to their language, their dress code, their humor, their ways of doing everything. Shout out to Alpha Harper. Mahal na mahal kita. Proud ako sa'yo kasi kahit gaano karaming tayomansi ang bilihin mo sa England, hindi ito pareho sa adobong kasalo mo ang pamilya mo sa La Union. Diba? This is a me thing, not a Filipino thing. And Andrew said, you live in a constant state of working for me. Even my mind always working to adjust itself to the culture I'm in, adjusting itself to the language, adjusting myself to the food, which is not my natural food. I'm always working in my mind and my body and emotions. And then I realized, oh, he's right. And I cried because I realized I don't lack love. I've given my life for the Filipino people and I love to live here and serve here. But I am tired and in deep need of rest. And it makes so much sense. My easy go-to is still British things because that's my blood. And when you strip all the energy away, you cannot beat watching Jeremy Clarkson building a farm and eating Yorkshire puddings. I think about Moses because Moses lived his entire life between cultures. Saved as a Hebrew slave, raised as an Egyptian prince, educated in the Egyptian system with their languages and culture and history, Hebrew by blood, Egyptian by family, Midianite by exile, and chosen by God. If anyone understands what it means to belong everywhere and nowhere at the same time, it was Moses. Moses, formed by a culture that wasn't his. Moses was born a Hebrew slave under a death sentence, and he should have died as a baby. Instead, he was rescued, not just from death, but into another culture entirely. So many of us die culturally in our own home cultures, not being aware of what culture is healthy or biblical and what part is just our country's culture. Pharaoh's household, Egyptian education, Egyptian power, and an Egyptian worldview. Acts 7:22 tells us, Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. That verse matters because Moses wasn't just around Egyptian culture, he was formed by it. He was a prince. And yet by faith, Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God. Hebrews 11:24. He was never fully Egyptian. He had the character and mindset of a prince, not a slave, and he carried Hebrew blood, Hebrew memory, and Hebrew identity, but not Hebrew experience. Experience matters because experience builds our belief cycles. Our experience sets the precedent of what we believe. So where did he belong? Not fully with his own people and not fully in the palace. Never quite native. Like me and my Filipino friend that I met at my brother's wedding, she's a Filipina brought up in British culture. Hebrew with all the training of Egypt. Filipina with all the training of a Brit. You're built different. You see things different. You have the value of both cultures and you have to get your self-confidence from somewhere other than your culture. So for me, I get it from God. I had to be willing to bend and allow my culture to wash away while I embrace Filipino culture. Every day learning more and more things about Filipino culture, the history, to help me adapt and work better for God's kingdom and to serve the Filipino people. When unresolved identity leaks. Exodus 2 tells us Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, and something inside of him snaps. He kills the Egyptian. Why? Because insecure identity or insecure culture always leaks out sideways. Moses tried to act Hebrew, but he thought like an Egyptian, defending the slaves by killing. We all do this, British, Filipino, whatever your culture, we're children of God living in a kingdom culture, free and saved and in God's plan. Then something happens and we respond with not even a worldly or sinful response. It could just be a British response or a Filipino response. So when you don't have enough money, instead of knocking on heaven's gates, we get into debt because that's Filipino culture. Or when someone hurts us, we go off on a tampo instead of trying to be humble and fix it. We often respond in our native culture. And yet as Christians, we are never quite native because your blood is now Jesus' blood. And what we seem to do is bounce between the two cultures, or in my case, the three. Moses, in the case of killing the slave, he responded with power, force, control, and it cost him everything. From prince to fugitive, from palace to pasture. He runs, and once again, Moses becomes a foreigner. This time in Midian, not Egyptian, not fully Hebrew, just other. This is never quite native. Not disliking where you are, but not knowing who you are anymore. This is the importance of knowing who you are in God. When I was 16, my dad lost his job for a church. And when he told me that his job was over, I remember hearing it and thinking, oh, my identity is found in my dad's job. I don't know who I am anymore. And I went straight to my bedroom and began to pray and ask God, please let my identity be found in you, God. I don't want to find my identity in something that can fade away or something that can finish. And from that day, I remember putting my trust and my identity in God and never looking back. I know that He loves me and He's made me this way, and that's okay. When adaptation becomes heavy, this is where I want to pause, because this is often where missionaries quietly break. Not loudly or dramatically, just slowly. This is where adapting stops feeling noble and starts feeling exhausting. And trust me, it can be. In your own culture, you can go out for a stroll to the shops or to the town. And here, if you're white, you're unusual, you're Kana, Americana, you're photograph worthy, you're different. You can't just hide. You can't just blend in and not be seen. When you realize you're adjusting your tone, your humor, your reactions, your instincts, where you're praised for being flexible, where privately grieving parts of yourself, it can take its toll. This year, we had a beautiful offer from someone who would happily donate to Filipinos' improvement of life and standard of living for our whole community. We did not have the final say over this, and the offer was refused. I cried for 3 days. The mental bench pressing of serving the Filipino people and the opportunity of blessing them came with the funds provided, and they refused. Why? I can only speculate that it's culture. In the Filipino culture, the white man was the colonizer. So it's very hard sometimes for people to believe that we are here to freely bless and serve them. Some mindsets, even subconsciously, look for the ulterior motive. Trust me, if we had ulterior motives, we wouldn't have given up our lives in the West to live in poverty in the East. This really made my heart broken because we're in the middle of God's story and there's promised land for His people in this story. But when fear stands in the way or culture stands in the way of God's kingdom culture, it's very hard even for God to have His way. This goes for all cultures. So hoping in light of this, you will try and take a step back out of your family culture, town's culture, national culture, worldview culture, and set your eyes on the highest culture of all of the kingdom of God's culture. What I like to call the royal law of love from James 2:8. Loving others more than we love ourselves, where loving others is primary and bringing God's kingdom down. During those 3 days of crying, the Holy Spirit reminded me of Moses. Exodus 6:6-9 says this. This is God speaking to Moses. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians, and I will bring you to a land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. So Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. When God has sent you to serve and they refuse to listen and accept your service, what a position to be in. We look at Moses now as the man for that moment, but the Israelites did not want to hear it because of number 1, discouragement, and number 2, harsh labor. They were not open to follow and listen to a prince of Egypt, Moses, a man of their culture who looked rich and was brought up in the palace. Listening to a palace-raised prince felt foreign. Maybe receiving blessing from a white man feels foreign, but if that's the way God is choosing to bless you, I encourage you to open your hands and your heart. God spoke, but the Israelites' culture of Egypt won. They got out of Egypt, but not one of them got into the promised land. Pride in your own culture can block God's favor. The Israelites could leave Egypt physically, but their minds and hearts still bound by the lessons of the culture as slaves. When God has sent you to serve a people and they refuse to listen and accept your service, it's really hard. True. Kingdom culture first and always over every other culture. We have a Filipino phrase, ang daming alam pero walang diskarte, which means they know a lot but there's no strategy. It's true, but this isn't about skin color anymore. God's looking for the willing. The worldly wise through culture says no, and your unbelief blocks God's blessing for you because your culture tells you to keep the power. Yet in God's kingdom culture, humility is the boss. Humble is the key. God's kingdom works through humility. It's hard when your skin color appears to be a blockage to God's work. This is the unhealthiness of culture we face on the mission field. You're never quite native. Moses lived in this tension for 40 years. 40 years in Midian, raising a family, living quietly, away from Egypt, away from his people. And here's the part we often miss. God didn't waste a single layer of Moses' life. God doesn't erase culture, he redeems it. When God finally calls Moses in Exodus 3, he doesn't ask Moses to become someone else. He doesn't say, forget Egypt, forget Midian, forget your past. He says, I've seen the misery of my people, so now go, I'm sending you. God sends Moses as he is, Egyptian trained, Hebrew hearted, Midian shaped. And Moses resisted. Who am I to do this? What if they don't listen? I'm not a good speaker. There we see his identity, his rejection, and his low self-esteem. Underneath those excuses is one question. Where do I belong? I'm never quite native. God doesn't give Moses an identity speech. He gives him a promise. I will be with you. Exodus 3:12. God doesn't resolve Moses' cultural tension. He redeems it. Everything Moses thought disqualified him became the very thing God used. Leadership, administration, language, authority. Moses didn't belong perfectly anywhere, but he belonged obediently to God. Adaption versus erasure. This is the line many missionaries quietly cross. There is a difference between adaption and erasure. Adaption says I'm learning. Erasure says I'm disappearing. Don't disappear, my darling. You are needed in all the cultures you're called to. Humility does not require invisibility. That's false humility. True humility is actually doing your absolute best with the gifts and talents and limited information you have. And that's okay, as long as you're committed to always improving and growing and changing for God. Love does not require self-abandonment. This is not love. No one is asking you to deny who God created you to be. I'm a red-haired, freckle-faced girl called to a nation of brown-skinned, black-haired beauties, and I have to fully accept that that's okay. I'm totally different in looks, but in heart, I'm very Filipino. Psalm 139 says, you knit me together in my mother's womb. God doesn't knit people together to unravel them later for the sake of harmony. Moses didn't need to erase Egypt from himself. God used it. He didn't need to deny his Hebrew identity. God fulfilled it. Moses didn't belong in Egypt, and he didn't fully belong with the Hebrews, and he didn't stay in Midian. But God used all three to shape a deliverer. I look like I don't belong here in the Philippines, and I no longer fit in England. Yet every time I get up in church to speak, I teach them something about Filipino history and culture because it is essential to be able to see it with clear eyes. For the culturally torn, if you feel tired, not physically but internally, this episode is for you. If you love the culture you're in but feel like you're losing yourself, you're not failing. You need to realign yourself with God's royal law of love. You're standing where Moses stood, between worlds, between identities, between callings, and God meets people there. Not when it's neat, not when it's resolved, but when it's honest. You don't honor culture by disappearing. The Filipino people need you. The Filipino people need me. The British people need you. The nation you're in needs you, and you honor that by showing up. Be rooted, humble, and willing to learn and eat rice, and be willing to be formed without being erased. It's great to be laughed at and scorned and ridiculed and looked at as less. Yes, it hurts, but it separates the people who love you from the people who want something from you, and yet we're called to love both. Never quite native keeps you uncomfortable, and that's how you grow and change. It's an exercise of the soul. God doesn't need you to choose between cultures. He needs you to trust him with all of them and open your heart to remember God created culture, and he's called you for such a time as this, in this culture. Yes, my dear, you are never quite native, and that is the true position of a missionary.